Hello everyone, if you're new here, I'm Alan with Earthglow, and this channel is all about sharing the joy of candle making. This fountain sounds like toilet water. Alright guys, so if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'm sure you really want to after this introduction. But today's video, we're going to be talking about sinkholes in candles. So essentially, a lot of you guys are already really familiar with this. I'm just going to kind of describe it very briefly. So sinkholes are basically where you'll see them a lot of the time, where you'll look at your candle and it'll have almost, it looks like a little cone type of a hole, almost like a little worm like dug right in there. They can be like teeny tiny, like the size of a pinpoint almost, to where you can barely see them, to like the size of, I would say, like 2 pencils or something in terms of like the diameter. But these are going to happen with a number of different waxes, and a lot of these waxes are very popular ones. So for example, actually a lot of different types of straight paraffins, and also a lot of well, I shouldn't say a lot of parasoys. One parasoy in particular that's really popular, IGI 6006, for example, is another one that's extremely prone to these sinkholes. Also, if you've used 464 soy, that is another wax that is extremely prone to them. So first, I want to just kind of get into very briefly why they happen. Now, this is sort of, there's a lot of factors that can be involved here. And I guess before I kind of get into any of them, I want to make clear that typically if you're getting sinkholes, it does not mean that you're doing something wrong in your process. And I'm going to get into exactly how we can easily remedy these in just a little bit. But a lot of candle makers, especially new ones, think that when they see these that, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. Well, usually no. Sometimes you can pour at a little bit of a lower temperature and it'll minimize them, but usually you're not doing anything wrong in your process. It has to do with the wax that you're working with and the container. Now, if we were to look at wax through a microscope, or really any liquid through a microscope, and I'm talking about melted wax, right? After you've just poured your candle, those particles are actually not stationary. They're in constant motion, and they're constantly kind of bumping around each other and moving about. Not as much as a gas, but much more so than a solid. And so as that wax is solidifying, it cools and solidifies at different rates, and those rates are dependent on the temperature relative to that area in the container. So for example, your candle jar, or even more so if you use a concrete candle, that edge is very hot, very cold around the edge of your jar. And so as your candle solidifies, the outer areas are going to solidify first, and the inner area is going to solidify last. And so as those particles are moving and solidifying gradually, the ones at the center, near where your wick is, they'll kind of carve out these little cavities and little air pockets due to this uneven rate of cooling. Now, sinkholes, as I said, do not happen with all waxes. 6006, a number of different paraffins, and Golden Brands 464, and I believe 415 as well, are all very prone to sinkholes. The easiest way to avoid them is to not use these waxes. Or if you do want to use these waxes and not get sinkholes, I would recommend using a container that is wider than it is tall. So like a tin, or well, a lot of tins, not all tins, right? But anything that's going to be wider, so the distance across, the diameter is wider than the container is tall. Those are going to almost always minimize sinkholes, even with waxes that are known to be problematic for these. Now, the thing that I do, because I do work with IGI 6006 a lot, and I work with Golden Brands 464 a lot too. Now, I didn't encounter problems with Golden Brands because of the container I was using it in. Primarily were those 8-ounce tins. And like I said, they're wider than they are tall, and you just really don't get sinkholes with containers like that. But what I will do is, after I poured the candle, about 2/3 into the setup, well, 2/3, that doesn't really make sense, about, I would say a couple hours after I poured the candle, I will take like a metal chopstick and poke what are called relief holes all around that wax. And I will focus near the wick because this is gonna be the area, like I said earlier, kind of where those cavities are gonna mainly form. As that wax is solidifying, it's going to become a solid quickest around the outer edges, and so those are gonna be generally okay. But that area near the wick is where that wax is kind of forming these cavities and air pockets, and that is exactly what these sinkholes are. So what happens when you poke these additional holes as that wax is solidifying is it opens up those pockets where those sinkholes are going to form. And then after your wax has fully solidified, now you've exposed all those pockets, and you just take a heat gun over that candle and you fill all of them in. Now, I will tell you, if you are working with one of these waxes that are more prone to sinkholes, I'm going to list all of them in the description box that I can think of. If you can think of any additional ones, please leave them in the comments as well. But you sometimes won't even know that you have a sinkhole because they can be so hard to see. That you almost have to just count on it for a lot of these waxes. And so I will proactively, for example, after I poured candles with 6006, I will proactively poke relief holes, usually about 10 to 12 per candle. Again, kind of focusing around the area where the wick is, but going around that whole kind of area. And then I will go ahead and probably around 6 hours later, fill them in with a heat gun, or you can do that the next day once you've kind of exposed all those pockets. Now, the reason it's really important to do this is because if you don't, for example, you can have a lot of issues burning a candle that has sinkholes, or your customer can. Some of them can include tunneling. You can have the candle just not burning really well, where it'll extinguish, because what happens is it'll burn really fine maybe at some points, but then at other points it's going to kind of drop down as those sinkholes are trying to fill themselves in when the candle's burning, and it just forms a really big mess, and it's just not the experience that you want your customer to have when they're burning your candle, right? Now, there's a lot of kind of people in the candle community talking about, you know, heating your jars a little bit in the oven on a very low setting, or even with a heat gun before you pour your candles. You can do this, and you may notice that there is a difference, but I typically don't do, I don't do this because there's simply not a good way to scale it. Maybe if you want to make like a few candles here and there, you could do that. But honestly, I would say it takes about the same time to do that as it would to just poke the relief holes and then fill it in with a heat gun. And I will link my 2 favorite heat guns for you guys in the description box. You can also check out my Amazon storefront. I've got all my favorite candle making supplies and soap supplies, concrete candle supplies, basically everything I get on Amazon, packing supplies, right in the description box always for my Amazon storefront. So that way, if you guys are looking to get the exact supplies I use, you can check that out. But really, I just don't think it's practical. I think that I would say that if you really want to avoid sinkholes, either, again, use a container that's wider than it is tall, use a wax that is not prone to them, or you can try pouring it like a lower temperature. I have not noticed with 6006 that is ever able to really get rid of them. But some people will claim that it has. I've never found that to be the case personally. So anyways, if you guys enjoyed this one, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, sending all of you peace, love, and light, and wishing all of you happy candle making. By the way, I guess we're doing a sip and chat today as well. So we're doing some boba in here with some black tea. It's really good. We had this Japanese market by my house, and I always go there, and I found out, like, from some of the real Japanese people what the best boba is and how to like make it, and it's really good. There's kind of a lot down here too. Hello everyone, if you're new here, I'm Alan with Earthglow, and this channel is all about sharing the joy of candle making. So essentially, a lot of you guys are already familiar with this. I'm just gonna briefly kind of describe it. So if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'm sure. But today's video, we're going to be talking about sinkholes in candles.